Bayonetta 3 is pretty disappointing. Let me explain. For the first issue, this is essentially just Bayonetta 2 again. Like, it is the same quality, pretty much same length as Bayonetta 2, which, don't get me wrong, Bayonetta 2 is a fantastic game, but when Bayonetta 2 was such a substantial increase in quality, and since then, Platinum's put out even greater games, this feels kinda like a step back. Not to mention the price increase. Bayonetta 2 goes for around $40. Bayonetta 3 goes for around $80. So you're essentially paying double the price for what is essentially Bayonetta 2 again. Which, don't get me wrong, I love this game, I loved Bayonetta 2. But I think the price is honestly what's gonna kill it. Because you're paying double for what is essentially the exact same game again. There aren't many quality of life improvements, there aren't many gameplay improvements. Frankly, all that's new are new playable characters, who we'll get into in a minute. But the core gameplay, and the bulk of the game anyway, is still just Bayonetta 2 again. It's basically the same complaint people had with Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3, of them basically being Splatoon 1.5 and Splatoon 2.5. This is essentially Bayonetta 2.5. This could have worked as DLC. Obviously, it's been so long, it's literally been an entire console generation. But what I'm saying is, the game should not be sold at a full $80. It's fun. I've enjoyed basically every moment with it. But its length and its price aren't equivalent. Especially when you compare literally the last game in the series, which is the same length and same quality, for half the price. Basically, the value just isn't there, especially when you can pick up other Platinum games on the Switch. Actually, I think you can play basically every fantastic Platinum game on the Switch. And frankly, I think basically every single one is more bang for your buck. As fantastic as this game is, again, it's Bayonetta 2 for double the price. If it was part of a series bundle, hell yeah, this would be worth it for $80 with the other two games. So, let's talk about the new stuff this game added. The characters. I'm going to talk about the main edition first, Viola. And I'm just going to say this, I hate her design. She's supposed to be from a different universe, but she just looks like she's in a punk band. Like, you could go so far with other universe concept, but she just genuinely looks like she's in a punk band. Like, give her either, hell, go for like a futuristic or a mythological, like mythology-inspired design. Do something like that, not punk band. Because that doesn't scream different universe. It screams, I listen to grunge music. So, the design bothers me on that level. So, it's stupid and it makes no sense. If she wasn't from a different universe, I would have nothing to say on the design. It's fine. But Viola, as a character, honestly, I don't care for her in the slightest. She's just boring. It also doesn't help that she barely interacts with the rest of the cast at all. Despite being essentially the secondary character in this game, she barely interacts with any members of the cast aside from Cheshire. So basically, you're supporting, like, your secondary protagonist barely interacts with your protagonist. Speaking of her, let's talk about Bayonetta. I love Bayonetta's new design, and it's probably my favorite design this character has ever had. But my problem with Bayonetta comes down to two things. One, she doesn't really interact with anyone aside from herself, which I'll get into in the story section. But secondly, in terms of character interactions, you could have such a cool thing for her arc with Viola, since she essentially was forced to act as a mother to Tsaritsa in the first game, and Tsaritsa's like a 5-year-old child, so you could do the same thing here with essentially a young adult with Viola. Too bad she doesn't and just ditches her, despite working with her to accomplish Viola's goal. Yeah, I don't get it either. But the other issue is Bayonetta isn't written like Bayonetta, if that makes sense. She's written, but something about her writing just doesn't feel like the same character. And it's not the new voice actress, but they didn't write the same Bayonetta. Like, weirdly enough, because this game is about the multiverse, this Bayonetta feels like a different multiverses version. Like a different universe Bayonetta, not the Bayonetta from the first 2 games. So, that writing is just really weird to me. And again, she really doesn't interact with anyone, which is a problem that both her and Viola have. But like, her interactions with the rest of the cast really helped her shine. Because, as I said, basically the only character Bayonetta interacts with in Bayonetta is Bayonetta. Which we'll get into in a minute. But let's talk about the final playable character, Jean. And Jean, despite being one of the playable characters, barely does anything. She feels like she was written the same as she was in the last 2 games. But also, she's barely in the game. And also, one of 3 playable characters. I don't get that. So, I have nothing to say on her other than her new design is weird. Because she basically kept the exact same design for the first 2 games, and then in this she just gets a brand new design. The point being, she's a playable character, and yet if you removed her, it wouldn't feel like much is missing. Luca, the character who's barely in this game, yet also the entire motivating factor for Viola's side of the story. Yeah. Luca got a massive cut. It sucks, because Luca's probably my favorite character from this franchise. And he basically went from being a major part of the supporting cast to being a MacGuffin you're chasing after. I really don't like that change. Frankly, this goes for the rest of the supporting cast as well, where Rodin, Enzo, and everyone else are essentially the exact same as they were in the last game, barely mattering. Anyway, on to gameplay. The Bayonetta gameplay is basically the exact same as it always was, and always probably will be. So, it's really solid, and I really like it. The new addition being demon summoning, which, honestly, it kind of just makes enemies die quicker in exchange for you being vulnerable. So as long as you don't get too cocky and just call off the demon if you're about to get hit, you're fine. And there are sections where basically that's the only thing you can do. So, really, it's worth going for if you have the correct, like, movement, correct, like, basically, they affect you in a way where it's hard to explain other than just raw DPS, but they do add a bit of strategy, but in reality, You just need to hold some restraint and not constantly spam them, and you'll be fine. Ignoring the fact I'm spamming one right now in this footage so I can zoom out the camera, but that's besides the point. Viola's gameplay is quite like Chibi from Nier Automata, if you have played that. In the sense of, it's a bunch of pretty generic sword swing action, with a Spider-Man-esque grappling hook that is exclusive to her. Actually, it isn't. Bayonetta has the same thing. She has a grappling hook. And it sucks, because, honestly, it's not that good. She gets the summon in the form of Cheshire, who is completely overpowered and there's no reason not to use constantly. Because Cheshire has, like, no drawbacks to being out, because unlike Bayonetta, when she uses a demon, you can still move and fight freely. Honestly, I really like Viola's gameplay, aside from one mechanic! Her witch time, so like your bullet time bonus dodge thing, because every Platinum game has had this for some reason, is mapped to a perfectly timed block. Unlike every other Platinum game I have played, where it is mapped to dodge. And it is so awkward and just non-intuitive, mostly because you unlock Viola, like, halfway through the game. And it's just like, hey, by the way, you know that core mechanic you've been doing for this whole series? Yeah, it's mapped to a different button now. The timing's the same, you just need to use a different button, and you also have to be stopped in place to block. Because the block button is also a lunge. Basically, as Viola, I just haven't been bothering with that, and I've just been focusing on dodging, because it's so awkward and unintuitive that I don't think it's worth bothering, at least in my opinion. Which sucks, because I really like that mechanic. I wish it was mapped to something different, and/or blocking was less intrusive. But I really wish I liked Viola's gameplay more than I did, because essentially it's a really solid alternative version to Bayonetta. And the only change that you would need to make for me to be happy with that is changing Viola's freaking wish time to either not exist, be mapped back to dodge, or be mapped to something else other than block. Like, I think something cool they could have done would be having it be tied to Cheshire in some way. Like, you can basically summon him as a human shield to activate witch time. I think that would be cool. But I don't like the block mechanic. I like the idea, but it just doesn't feel very good to use. So let's move on to the final gameplay style, and the one that is by far the worst, John's. John's gameplay style isn't necessarily bad, but it falls an issue that I've seen other games fall into of, it is nothing like what you came here for. It's a side-scrolling stealth section where you're supposed to stealth kill enemies. In a 3D action game. It's not bad. The problem is, it just completely ruins the pacing of the game, because you don't come here for it. It's just this awkward thing that feels like it was part of a different game. And just thrown in this one. Because, frankly, this doesn't feel like a Bayonetta or a Platinum-style game. This feels like padding. Because it's completely different to what you came to this game for. It's an issue I've seen other games fall into. Like, for example, I'm playing through Monster Hunter Rise with a friend. And it has Rampage quests. I don't mind them because I am a fan of tower defense. But they kinda suck because you go to this game to play what Monster Hunter is at its core. And you just get stopped every now and again by, hey, play tower defense game. And you have to do it to progress. If this was optional, it'd be fine. The problem is, I didn't come here for a side-scrolling stealth game. I came here for a fast-paced action game. This is not a bad gameplay section, but it comes down to developers should really stop putting a completely different genre in their game. Because this is not what I came to Bayonetta 3 wanting to play. Like, I understand wanting to spice things up. I understand wanting to try new things, because Platinum basically just makes action games. But how about you make a new property? Or a spin-off? Because I'll be honest, I wouldn't have an issue with this if it was, like, John. The game. And it's just a decently length, like, $30, $20 action, like, side-scrolling stealth game. Basically, if this was longer and its own game, and not awkwardly shoehorned into Bayonetta 3, I wouldn't have an issue with it. My issue with it is, I came here for Bayonetta 3. It's basically just this intrusive side mode that you aren't interested in, because that isn't what you came to play. And it just feels like padding. Basically, it's not bad. The problem is, I came here for Bayonetta, not John. Now time for the rest of the gameplay section. The level design. I'll be entirely honest, level design's fine. The levels are just too long, considering how easy it is to miss a collectible or a hidden area. Basically, I think I'd divide these levels by 3. Not cut down on content, but basically make it so you don't have to, like, if you miss something right at the end of a level and you want to go get it, you don't have to run all the way back to the end of that level. For example, because the levels in this game are about an hour long. Just split them into 3 20-minute levels. Or just let me skip sections. It basically comes down to, if you miss something, too bad. Hope you're willing to replay through the whole game again. Basically, I just really wish there was either a way to skip to levels, or the levels were just more but shorter. But to be entirely blunt, the level count is also an issue. Because there's like 14 levels in this game. So you're only getting like 14 hours of gameplay, if that. And this game's $80. It basically falls down to the principle of the levels there needs to be more levels because there needs to be more gameplay because this game is $80. Although I do like every single level. They're all really fun. Aside from the John ones, which comes down to the same issue I was just talking about of, I came here for an action game. I didn't come here for stealth. But the level design's pretty good, and it's overall really solid. I kind of just wish there was more of it. The story is fine. I'm not going to talk about much, because this game pretty well just released. But it's a multiversal adventure, and the reason characters don't interact with the other cast that much is because most of Bayonetta's interactions are with other Bayonettas from different universes. And most of Viola's interactions are with Cheshire. And Luca is basically a MacGuffin for Viola to chase after. Essentially, the story does its job, which is all it needs to do, but I really wish these characters actually interacted with each other. But like, hey, I came here for the gameplay, not the story. The story does its job for a game like this of give the player a reason to be going from point A to point B, which for a game where I'm not here for the story and I'm just here for the action and for the gameplay, that's all I need. I don't need a compelling story for a game like this. If the gameplay's fun, that's really all I need. So, overall, story's good enough. It does its job, but it's also probably the weakest story in the Bayonetta series. And frankly, this game feels so disconnected from the other two. It feels, again, less like Bayonetta 3 and more like Variant Bayonetta one, so to speak. Also, I'm kind of sick of multiverse plots, because it feels like they're just popping out everywhere this year. Which is definitely Marvel's fault. Because Marvel is just has already started to oversaturate that. And we have like 5 more years of Marvel oversaturating the multiverse. So basically, it's a multiverse plot. That's fine enough. But the variants of the characters in the different universes aren't different enough to warrant them interacting and taking away from the interactions of the main cast. But the story does its job of giving you a reason to be going from point A to point B. Overall, it's a solid game. If it goes on sale, it's definitely worth a price of around $40. But the game is generally solid. I generally like it. It's generally fun. The only problem is it's lacking in areas and it doesn't feel like much of an improvement. But if you want other cool action games with Platinum on the Switch, check out the recently re-released Nier Automata. I haven't played the Switch version, so I don't know how it runs, but the PlayStation 4 version, which is what I played, is fantastic, and I love it. Or the Switch exclusive Astral Chain. It is like the most underrated Platinum game ever, and it's referenced multiple times in this. That weird dog mascot thing in the beginning of the game. Yeah, that's a thing from Astral Chain. And I love it. And I really wish Astral Chain was acknowledged more by people, because it is the most underrated Platinum game, because it is their best one, in my personal opinion. But that would be a video where I praise Astral Chain, and not a video called Bayonetta 3 is a disappointing mess. Which, I will be entirely honest, that title's definitely over-exaggerated, but it is disappointing. I was hoping for either more or a bigger improvement from the last. And the best part is basically the story, the gameplay styles, Jean being part of this for some reason. Despite her gameplay doing nothing for me, and also it having very little effect on the overall story. And really, the game's mostly just getting MacGuffins. Overall, it's a fun action game. It's disappointing, but it's still fun. I'm still enjoying my time with it. And, hell, it's probably something that we'll get a second playthrough in a year or two. Because it's fun. I like it. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention there is a literal setting that insults the player. But that is for another day. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe. And after this is a quick explanation for those who have finished the game on why some things might sound a bit weird. Now, that's the end of this review, but I am just gonna say, I have fully completed the game, so some of the things I said in this review aren't fully accurate or could be wrong, but since this review is still releasing so early into this game's lifespan, I wanted to just purposely ignore those. So, that's why some things for anyone who's played the game might feel a bit off, or do not yell at me for oh, well, you shouldn't be making a review if you haven't finished the game. I have. Genuinely. I have fully finished the main story of this game. But I wanted to avoid spoilers. So I just wanted to clarify that.